There's something wrong with the empty tent we found in the Cascades. The silence inside isn't natural. I've been camping my whole life, but I've never heard silence like that before. Not the peaceful quiet of nature or the dead of night. I mean true, absolute silence, the kind that makes you question if you still exist. That's what we found in that tent, and I wish to God we'd never unzipped it in the first place. My girlfriend Mia and I had been planning this hiking trip for months. She's the adventurous one, always pushing me to try new trails and explore off the beaten path. I prefer sticking to marked routes, but she has this way of making everything sound exciting. "Come on, James," she'd say, her green eyes lighting up. "Where's your sense of adventure?" That was before we found the tent. Now, I never want to see another campsite again. We were 3 days into our trek through the Cascade Mountains when we spotted it. The weather had turned nasty, with a heavy mist clinging to the trees and making everything look slightly wrong, like a photo that's just a little out of focus. Mia spotted the blue tent first, pitched perfectly in a small clearing about 50 yards off the trail. "Hey, check that out," she called, already veering off the path. "Maybe they have some extra coffee we can beg for. I'm dying for a cup that isn't instant." I followed reluctantly, noting how the tent looked almost too perfect. No sagging fabric, no mud splatter despite the wet weather. Just pristine blue nylon gleaming through the mist. "I don't see anyone around," I said, scanning the clearing. No backpacks, no cooking equipment, no signs of life at all. Mia reached the tent first and called out a hello. No response. She unzipped the entrance and poked her head inside. "Hello? Hello? Anyone home?" The words came out strange, or rather, they didn't come out at all. Her mouth moved, but the sound just vanished. She pulled back, startled. "Did you hear that?" Or, "Not hear that, I guess?" I stepped forward and stuck my hand through the tent entrance, snapping my fingers. Nothing. Not even the muffled sound you get when snapping underwater. Just complete, absolute silence. Against my better judgment, we both crawled inside. The interior was ordinary enough. Sleeping bag, pillow, even a paperback book lying open face down. But every movement we made was swallowed by that impossible silence. I could feel my heart pounding, but couldn't hear it. Mia mouthed something to me, and I shook my head, pointing to my ears. The silence felt like a physical presence pressing against my eardrums. We got out of there fast. Mia wanted to set up our tent nearby. "Safety in numbers," she argued. I wanted to hike on, but the light was failing, and the mist had thickened into a proper fog. Reluctantly, I agreed to camp in the clearing, but insisted on positioning our tent so we could see the blue one from our entrance. At night, I couldn't sleep. The sound of Mia's steady breathing beside me was reassuring, normal, but I kept straining to hear anything from the other tent. Around 3 a.m., I heard it, a rustling sound like someone moving around inside fabric. I shook Mia awake, and we both listened. The sound came again, definitely from the blue tent. Mia grabbed our flashlight before I could stop her. "We have to check," she whispered. "What if someone's in trouble?" The beam of our flashlight cut through the fog as we approached. The rustling had stopped. Mia's hand trembled as she reached for the zipper. Inside, empty, just like before. We searched the whole tent, but there was no sign anyone had been there. That's when Mia gasped. I followed her gaze to our left, where another tent had appeared, identical to the first. Same pristine blue nylon, same perfect pitch. but something was wrong. Wrong with its shape, like the geometry wasn't quite right. Mia moved toward it. I grabbed her arm. "Don't." "We have to know," she said, using that same tone she always did when convincing me to take risks. She pulled away and approached the new tent. The zipper sounded impossibly loud in the night air as the entrance opened. I saw nothing. Not darkness, not emptiness, but nothing. It was like looking into a void that shouldn't exist, a hole in reality itself. And it was spreading, the edges of the tent opening seeming to widen impossibly. Mia stood transfixed. I saw her mouth move, forming words I couldn't hear. Then she took a step forward. I lunged for her, grabbing her jacket just as she began to lean into that impossible darkness. For a moment, we struggled at the edge of the void, me pulling back, her drawn forward by something I couldn't see. Then she blinked, like waking from a trance, and we both scrambled backward. We ran, left everything except what we were wearing, ran until our lungs burned and our legs gave out, following the trail by moonlight until we reached the ranger station at dawn. They never found our equipment or the blue tent or its impossible twin. The clearing itself seemed to have vanished. The ranger said there was no such spot where we described it. Mia doesn't go hiking anymore. She says she's lost her sense of adventure. But sometimes I can't help but wonder what would have happened if we'd entered deeper into that tent. If you're camping and smell something like rotting fruit mixed with candy, do not investigate. I should have known something was wrong when Maya's nosebleed wouldn't stop. We'd been camping for just 2 nights when it started, but none of us connected it to that sickeningly sweet smell that had been hanging around our campsite. You know how it is when you're out in the woods. Everything has its own weird scent, and after a while, you just stop questioning it. God, I wish we had questioned it sooner. There were 5 of us on this trip. Me, my boyfriend Derek, his sister Maya, our friend Chris, who organized the whole thing, and Chris's new girlfriend Jen, who none of us really knew that well. We'd planned this getaway for months, wanting to escape the summer heat in the city and explore some of the more remote trails in Blackwood Forest. Chris had found this spot online, far enough from the marked trails that we'd have total privacy, but still technically within the park boundaries. At least that's what he claimed. The first day was perfect. We set up our 3 tents in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines, the kind that block out most of the sunlight even at noon. Derek and I took the blue tent. Maya had her own small one, and Chris shared his with Jen. We spent the afternoon hiking and gathering firewood, and that evening we sat around the campfire trading stories and passing around a bottle of whiskey Chris had brought. That's when I first noticed the smell. It was faint, like overripe fruit left in the sun too long, but with an underlying sweetness that reminded me of cotton candy. Maya mentioned it too, but Chris brushed it off, saying it was probably just some wild berry bushes nearby. Jen agreed, though something in her expression made me wonder if she was just trying to impress Chris. The second day, the smell was stronger, and that's when the weird stuff started happening. Maya woke up with dried blood crusted around her nostrils, and Derek complained about an itchy rash on his arms. I noticed similar red patches starting to form on my neck. We blamed it on mosquitoes, on allergies, on anything that made sense. Normal explanations for normal problems, right? But then Jen started acting strange. She kept wandering off from the group, always in the same direction toward a dense patch of undergrowth about 50 yards from our campsite. When she'd come back, she'd have dirt under her fingernails and this vacant look in her eyes. Chris tried to joke about it, saying she was probably just looking for a private spot to pee, but I caught him watching her with growing concern. On the third night, the smell became unbearable. It was like someone had dumped a gallon of perfume mixed with rotting meat all over our campsite. None of us could sleep. Around midnight, we heard Jen leave her tent. Through the mesh window of ours, Derek and I watched her walk into the woods with jerky, puppet-like movements. Chris followed her this time. They came running back 20 minutes later, Chris shouting for us to pack up now. But it was too late. We could all hear them now, footsteps circling our campsite, twigs snapping in patterns too deliberate to be animals. And that smell, it was everywhere, filling our lungs, making us gag. Maya was the one who finally spotted it, a patch of disturbed earth where Jen had been digging. Her hands trembling, she pointed her flashlight at the ground, and we saw pale fingers poking through the soil. Chris started digging frantically, and soon we uncovered what was causing the smell. A body. It couldn't have been dead more than a week, wrapped in plastic that had split open in the summer heat. That's when we heard the laugh. High-pitched, delighted, coming from right behind us. We spun around to find Jen standing there, her face split in a wide grin that didn't reach her eyes. "I knew you'd find her eventually," she said, her voice eerily calm. "They always do. The smell makes sure of that." Derek grabbed my arm and whispered, "Run." But as we turned to flee, we saw them. Shadowy figures emerging from between the trees, all wearing the same twisted smile as Jen. The smell was overwhelming now, and I realized with horror that it wasn't coming from the body at all. It was coming from them. I'm writing this from a hospital bed. They found us 2 days later, all except Chris. The doctors can't explain the chemical burns in our nasal passages or the strange patterns the rash left on our skin. They ask me questions about what happened, but I can't tell them the truth. How do you explain that your friend's new girlfriend was part of some cult that uses corpses as bait? That they get off on watching people slowly realize they're being hunted? The police found 6 more bodies buried in that clearing, all recent, all wrapped in the same plastic. They never found Chris or Jen. If you're planning a camping trip and you catch a whiff of something sweet, something that reminds you of cotton candy and rotting fruit, run. Run as fast as you can. And whatever you do, don't look back to see who's smiling at you from between the trees. My friends and I found a strange wax shrine while camping. Now I'm the only one left to warn others. I wish I could blame this all on exhaustion or paranoia, but the waxy residue still under my fingernails proves otherwise. It's been 3 days since I made it out of Mystic Grove Forest, and I still can't shake the smell, that sickly sweet mixture of beeswax and something else. Something that reminds me of rendered fat left too long in the sun. I need to write this down while the details are fresh, while I can still remember Charlotte's face when she realized what we'd done. God, Charlotte, I'm so sorry. It was supposed to be a simple camping trip. 4 friends trying to reconnect after college had pulled us in different directions. Charlotte, my best friend since middle school, had suggested Mystic Grove Forest. She'd always been our group's adventure seeker, the one who pushed us out of our comfort zones. Ben, ever the skeptic, had Googled the location immediately and found all those missing persons reports. He laughed them off as local folklore, but something in those stories caught my attention. They all mentioned a sweet smell, like candles burning in an enclosed space. "Come on, Emma," Charlotte had said, her eyes bright with that familiar spark of mischief. "When's the last time we all did something spontaneous?" She had a point. Between my accounting job, Ben's medical residency, Charlotte's freelance photography, and Jake's startup, we barely had time for group texts anymore. The first day was perfect, almost suspiciously so. We found an ideal camping spot near a small clearing, the kind you see in outdoor magazines. Jake, always the Boy Scout, got our tents up while Ben collected firewood. Charlotte wandered off with her camera, hunting for what she called golden hour magic. I remember feeling so at peace, watching the sunlight filter through the leaves. That should have been my first warning. In horror movies, it's always the perfect days that turn ugly. We found the shrine just before sunset. Charlotte spotted it first, a crude structure about waist high, made entirely of what looked like yellowed wax and hardened fat. The thing was grotesque, with odd lumps and protrusions that almost resembled faces if you looked too long. Around its base, small animal bones had been arranged in patterns that made my eyes hurt if I tried to follow them. That's when the hiker showed up. He was a thin man with weathered skin and eyes that seemed too wide for his face. He didn't introduce himself, just stood at the edge of our camp and stared at the shrine. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice surprisingly soft. "Not near their offering place." Ben, always ready with a smart comment, asked, "On whose offering place?" "The tallow men," the hiker replied, still not looking at us. "They protect the forest. Take what they're owed from those who don't show respect." He told us about them. Waxy figures that moved like stop-motion animation come to life, leaving greasy trails wherever they touched. According to him, they'd been here since before the first settlers, spirits of the forest that had taken on forms mimicking human bodies but made from rendered fat and beeswax. We laughed it off, of course. Jake even took a selfie next to the shrine, making a face. The hiker just shook his head and walked away. Looking back, I wish we'd paid attention to which direction he went. Later that night, when we tried to find the main trail, we realized no one could remember seeing him actually leave. The handprints showed up that first night. I spotted them on my tent while getting ready for bed. Perfect impressions of human hands, but made from something that looked like melted candle wax. They were still warm to the touch. Charlotte wanted to pack up right then, but Ben convinced us it was just some local kids playing pranks. Jake backed him up, suggesting we were letting the hiker's story get to us. Then our supplies started disappearing. First, it was small things. Ben's phone charger, Jake's flashlight, my granola bars. But on the second night, we woke up to find Charlotte's entire backpack gone, along with all our maps. The waxy handprints had multiplied, now forming trails that led into the darker parts of the forest. When we tried to follow them, we kept getting turned around, ending up back at our camp no matter which direction we took. That's when we started seeing them. Just glimpses at first. Tall, humanoid figures standing between distant trees. They looked like rough approximations of people, as if someone had tried to mold human shapes out of melted wax, but got all the proportions slightly wrong. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, like watching frame-by-frame footage played just a bit too slowly. Jake cracked first. He tried to run for it in the middle of the night, screaming about how they were getting closer. We heard him for about 5 minutes, his voice getting fainter and fainter until it just stopped. Charlotte wanted to look for him, but Ben held her back. "They're hurting us," he said, his voice shaking. I'm not proud of what happened next. We fought about what to do, each of us blaming the others for getting us into this mess. That's when Charlotte noticed the shrine had changed. The wax faces in it were clearer now, and one of them, oh God, one of them looked exactly like Jake. Ben tried to destroy the shrine. Charlotte and I begged him not to, but he wouldn't listen. He kept saying it was just wax, just some sick joke. The moment his boot connected with it, the air filled with that sickly sweet smell, so strong it made us gag. And the figures, they stopped being glimpses. They stepped out into the clearing, their waxy bodies glistening in the moonlight, moving with that horrible stuttering motion. I ran. I'm not proud of it, but I ran. The last thing I heard was Charlotte screaming of Ben's name and a wet sound like candle wax being poured onto stone. I made it out somehow, though the next few hours are a blur. The police didn't believe my story, of course. They're still searching for the others, but I know they won't find them. If you're planning a camping trip to Mystic Grove Forest, please stay away from any shrines you might find, and if you smell something sweet, like beeswax and rendered fat, back off. My sister died in a climbing accident 6 months ago. Last week, I found her skin hanging from a tree. I've been trying to write this down for days, but my hands won't stop shaking. The doctors say writing about it might help, but they don't understand. Every time I close my eyes, I see those empty shells hanging from the branches, gently swaying in the breeze like grotesque wind chimes. The worst part? I keep checking my own skin, running my fingers along the seams, making sure it isn't becoming loose, making sure it still belongs to me. It started 3 weeks ago when I decided to take that solo camping trip to Red Bark State Forest. My therapist had suggested it. Reconnect with nature to process your grief, she said. It had been 6 months since Sheila's accident, and I hadn't been handling it well. My sister was always the adventurous one, always dragging me on hiking trips and outdoor excursions. The irony that a climbing accident took her still haunts me. Maybe that's why I chose to go camping alone. Some misguided attempt to channel her spirit. The first 2 days were actually peaceful. I found a secluded spot near Crystal Lake, far from the marked trails and tourist-friendly campgrounds. Sheila would have loved it. Pristine water, ancient pines, and that profound silence you can only find deep in the wilderness. I spent my time setting up camp, taking photos of interesting fungi, my latest hobby, and trying to identify bird calls using an app she had installed on my phone months ago. The third morning, everything changed. I was gathering firewood when I spotted something pale hanging from a branch about 15 feet up. At first, I thought it was just some trash left behind by careless hikers. But as I got closer, my blood ran cold. It was a deer skin, complete, unblemished, and impossibly intact. No blood, no tears, no sign of violence. It looked as if the deer had simply stepped out of it. I've seen taxidermied animals before. This was different. The skin was fresh, almost translucent in the morning light, with a weird silvery sheen to it. What really got to me were the edges. They weren't cut or torn. They looked more like openings, like the seams of a costume. I should have left right then. Sheila would have. She always said the wilderness demands respect, and that when something feels wrong, you listen to that instinct. But I convinced myself there must be a logical explanation. Maybe it was some kind of art installation, or perhaps local hunters had strange practices. I took some photos and tried to put it out of my mind. That night, the whispers started. I was drifting off to sleep when I heard it, a sound like dry leaves being crushed underfoot, circling my tent. Then came the breathing, heavy and wet, like someone with fluid in their lungs. I lay perfectly still, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. The footsteps stopped right outside my tent. "Warm," whispered a voice that wasn't quite human. It had too many layers, like multiple people speaking slightly out of sync. "This one's still warm," another voice responded, higher pitched, but with that same unsettling multiplicity. Fresh, supplemental, perfect. I didn't sleep that night. As the first rays of dawn broke through the trees, I finally worked up the courage to unzip my tent. What I found made me wish I hadn't. They were everywhere. Human skins, dozens of them, hanging from the branches like macabre decorations. Men, women, even children, all complete, all hollow, all with those same strange seams. Some were fresh, with that same silvery sheen as the deer skin. Others were older, dried and darkened like ancient parchment. Each face was frozen in an expression of terror. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach lurch. One of the fresher skins looked familiar. It took me a moment to place it, but when I did, my world shattered. The small crescent-shaped scar on the left shoulder, the tiny tattoo behind the ear, it was Sheila. What they found at the bottom of that cliff hadn't been her body. It had been an empty shell. I ran. I'd like to say I was brave, that I tried to investigate or fight back. But primal terror took over. I left everything except my phone and car keys as I sprinted through the forest. I could hear them pursuing me, not just their footsteps, but the horrible sound of their not quite right movements, like leather stretching and creaking. "Such lovely seams," they called after me, "such a perfect fit." I made it to my car, though I still don't remember most of that desperate flight through the woods. The authorities found my abandoned campsite, but of course there were no skins hanging in the trees. Just some loose trash caught in the branches, they said. They're monitoring me now, concerned about my episode. But I know what I saw. More importantly, I know they're still out there. Sometimes I've been finding silvery strands stuck to my clothes, like the delicate threads you might use to sew a costume. My skin feels looser these days. The doctors say it's just anxiety, that I'm imagining things. But this morning, I found something in the mirror that I can't explain away. A thin, silvery line along my shoulder, exactly like the seams I saw in the forest. I think they're coming to finish what they started. And the worst part? Part of me wants to know what it feels like, stepping out of yourself, becoming hollow. Sheila would understand. After all, she's one of them now. If you're reading this and you go camping, remember, not everything that looks human is wearing their fur skin. And if you hear whispers in the night about warmth and perfect fits, run away as fast as you can and never go back, because they're always looking for new skins to wear. The trees in Elderwood Grove don't just sway in the wind, they breathe. I learned this the hard way. I've always found comfort in solitude, especially among ancient trees. That was before I learned that some forms of solitude aren't meant to be disturbed, and some forests prefer to keep their secrets buried. Now, when I hear the wind whisper through leaves, I can't help but wonder if it's really the wind at all. My name is Ava Villa, and I'm a wildlife photographer specializing in old-growth forests. I've spent countless nights alone in the wilderness, documenting the subtle changes that occur when human eyes aren't watching. That's what brought me to the Elderwood Grove, a remote stretch of forest that hadn't been properly surveyed since the 1970s. Local hiking forums mention unusual wind patterns and inexplicable equipment malfunctions, but I dealt with worse. Besides, I needed this shoot for my upcoming exhibition on threatened ecosystems. The trouble started on my second night. I'd set up camp in a small clearing surrounded by towering hemlocks, their trunks wider than my car. The first day had been productive. I captured some stunning shots of rare fungi and what I believed to be an undocumented species of moss. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary except perhaps how quiet it was. No bird song, no scurrying creatures. I chalked it up to the density of the canopy and my own presence disturbing the wildlife. That night, I woke to what sounded like someone with pneumonia struggling to breathe. The sound was distant but distinct. A wet, rattling inhale followed by a long, wheezing exhale. My first thought was that another hiker might be in distress. I grabbed my flashlight and poked my head out of the tent, but the beam revealed only still trees and ground fog. "Hello," I called out. "Is anyone there?" The breathing stopped immediately. The silence that followed was absolute, pressing against my ears like cotton. I waited for several minutes, straining to hear anything, but there was nothing, not even the usual nighttime forest sounds. Just as I was about to go back inside, a gust of wind rushed through the clearing, making the trees sway and creak. Of course, I thought it was just the wind playing tricks. But when I laid back down, I noticed something odd. The wind was moving through the trees in a pattern. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. Each breath seemed to draw closer, and with it, the trees appeared to lean inward, their shadows stretching across my tent like grasping fingers. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Trees don't breathe. Trees don't move on their own. I'm a scientist, for God's sake. I know better than to let my imagination run wild. Still, I found myself taking photos of the trees' positions, marking their alignment against my tent's frame, just to prove to myself nothing was changing. When I checked the photos an hour later, my hand started shaking. The trees had moved, not by much, maybe a few degrees, but they were definitely closer to my tent than before. The breathing had grown louder, too, no longer just from one direction, but seemingly from all around me. The sound had a presence to it now, a weight that pressed down on my chest and made my own breathing shallow. I decided to pack up and leave. I'd gotten enough photos anyway, and something about this place felt deeply wrong. But as I started breaking down my tent, my headlamp caught something strange in the undergrowth. Thin, pale tendrils that looked like roots, but moved slightly like seaweed in a current. They weren't there when I set up camp. The breathing suddenly grew louder, and I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. Those tendrils were everywhere now, forming a web-like pattern that all led to a central point about 20 feet from my campsite. As I watched, horrified, the earth there began to bulge upward. I abandoned my tent and gear, grabbing only my camera and phone, But when I turned to run, I found my path blocked by trees that I swear weren't that close before. I tried another direction, but it was the same. The forest had closed in around me, forming a tight circle. The breathing was deafening now, and it didn't sound like wind anymore. It sounded hungry. That's when I remembered something I'd read about carnivorous plants and their hunting strategies. Some use chemical lures, others use tripwires, but the most successful ones mimic their prey's natural environment, making them feel safe until it's too late. The ground erupted behind me. I spun around and barely managed to take one photo before running blindly into the forest. Whatever emerged from that hole, I caught only glimpses of pale, fibrous flesh somewhere between fungus and root, pulsing with a sickly bioluminescence. The photo on my camera shows even less, just a blur of white against the darkness. Through sheer force and will, I was able to escape, though the memory is blurry. The next clear memory I have is stumbling onto a hiking trail at dawn, miles from where I'd set up camp. When I reported what happened, the park rangers found my campsite exactly as I'd left it, except there was no sign of any hole, no pale tendrils, and the trees were spaced normally. They suggested I might have gotten turned around in the dark, maybe eaten some bad mushrooms. But I know what I saw, I know what I heard, and I know that somewhere in the Elderwood Grove there's something ancient and patient, something that's learned to hunt by making the forest itself into a trap. It's still there, breathing, waiting for the next person who thinks they're alone in the woods. I still work as a wildlife photographer, but I don't do solo camping anymore. And when the wind blows through the trees, making that soft rushing sound, I can't help but hold my breath and listen just to make sure it's really the wind I'm hearing.